5 years ago, my first love boyfriend time traveled to the present. That was when we loved each other the most. He found me and asked, "Lydia, did we get married?" I gently touched his brows and eyes. Smiling, I said, "Brian, you're going to get married, but not to me." Chapter 1. After work. As I walked home and reached the entrance of an alley, someone suddenly came up from behind and grabbed my wrist. I thought it was a criminal. Just as I was about to pull a small knife out of my bag, I heard a familiar voice. "Lydia, it's me, Brian." Why was he here? He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. "You don't even recognize your own boyfriend? You deserve a smack." I let out a cold laugh, yanked my hand free, and said, "Did you get kicked in the head? You can't even remember your own girlfriend? I suggest you go to the ER. He froze for a moment. Then he pulled me toward the light, anxiously explaining, "It's really me. Take another look." It really was Brian. But something felt off. The sharp decisiveness he had developed in the business world over the years was gone. Instead, there was a trace of youthfulness and innocence, like him back in college. Brian grabbed my hand again and pressed it against his face. "Lydia, I'm 20-year-old Brian. Are we married now?" Brian said that he was 20 years old and had somehow ended up in the present. He had nowhere to go, other than me. He couldn't find a single familiar person. "Number 7 already has a different tenant now," Brian said, touching the tip of his nose, his tone cautious. Number 7. When Brian started his business in his junior year, I stayed by his side. We rented a 1-bedroom apartment at No. 7, on Nangang Road. We lived there for 4 years. We endured his hardest times together, until he met the only daughter of an investment director in a city, and the two of them got engaged almost overnight. He looked at me like a helpless puppy, eyes fixed on mine. "Lydia, if you don't take me in, I have nowhere to go." I thought to myself, nowhere to go? In this South City, half of it belongs to you and the Sue family. Chapter 2. I took out my car keys from my bag. A beep sounded not far away. Brian followed behind me, saying in surprise, "Lydia, you bought a car?" "Brian," I said, stopping and looking at him seriously. It's been 5 years. Maybe my attitude felt too unfamiliar compared to what he remembered. For the rest of the time, he didn't say a word, until I parked the car in front of a massive villa in the suburbs. He finally looked up, hesitant and shocked. "Where is this?" "This is your home," I said calmly as I turned off the engine. "Get out." Brian's expression stiffened. His hand rested on the car door handle, but he didn't press it for a long time. "You're coming with me, right?" Sometimes he could be unbelievably stubborn. I sighed. Then I lied to him. "I'll go park the car first. I'll be right there." Brian nodded. He slowly walked toward the villa, even turning back every 3 steps. He thought I would follow. Of course, I wouldn't. His family wasn't mine. I picked up my phone and called Tina. Soon, the door of the villa opened. Tina rushed out in surprise, hugging Brian as she shouted, "Brian, where have you been?" I started the car and quickly drove away. On my phone screen was still the headline from a few days ago. "Missing, young CEO Brian of a listed company." No matter which version of Brian it is, I've returned you to where you belong. Chapter 3. On the way home, I received a call from Bradley. "Why did you get off work so late today? Do you need me to come pick you up?" Bradley was introduced by a colleague. He teaches at a nearby university. We hadn't known each other for long, but we both felt it was a good match, so we made things official. He's completely different from Brian. Back then, Brian was busy building his startup, and my whole life revolved around him. But Bradley is thoughtful and attentive. When I'm with him, I feel completely at ease. Even though I told Bradley not to come pick me up, by the time I parked the car, he had already come downstairs. He adjusted my scarf for me and complained, "It's so cold today, and your boss still made you work overtime?" Dinner was braised fish he had cooked, fragrant and delicious. He tapped my head lightly. "I knew you like fish." The next day was the weekend. I turned off my alarm, planning to sleep in until I woke up naturally. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Bradley was making breakfast in the kitchen and casually went to open the door. Brian's voice came from outside. "Isn't this Lydia's place?" I jolted awake instantly, still in my pajamas. I hurried toward the entrance. Bradley didn't know Brian. He asked. Yes, it is. What do you need with her? Brian's voice turned cold. Who are you? Why are you in her apartment at this hour? Brian! I rushed to Bradley's side and grabbed his hand. Don't start trouble. Get out! Brian's face went pale for a moment. Lydia, I really don't understand. What exactly happened in these 5 years? He forced an ugly smile. That Tina said she's my fiancé, and that everyone knows I dumped you, but I just can't understand it. How could I possibly leave you to marry someone else? I didn't sleep all night. I finally found out where you live now. Lydia, please don't drive me away again. Bradley didn't know Brian, but by now he had a general idea of what was going on. He tightened his grip on my hand and stepped in front of me protectively. Sir, I don't know what happened between you and Lydia, but you already have a fiancé. Acting like this is pretty shameless. A very blunt statement. Brian looked at Bradley, shielding me. His face turned deathly pale. After a long pause, he let out a cold laugh. What does that Tina have to do with me? I only met her for the first time yesterday. If Lydia, you feel uncomfortable about it, I can call her right now and break it off. At that moment, the Brian in front of me overlapped with the President Brian admired by everyone in the business world. He had been able to cut off 8 years of a secret relationship, starting from high school and lasting until our breakup, in just 1 week. He had even held a press conference to appease the Sue family, publicly clarifying that he had nothing to do with Lydia. Now, of course, he could just as easily cast off Tina Sue without hesitation. After all, to the him of this moment, that name meant absolutely nothing. Chapter 4. After receiving Brian's call, Tina arrived in less than an hour. It was hard to imagine how many red lights she must have run to get from the wealthy district to this remote old neighborhood. But when she arrived, Brian didn't even let her sit down to rest. He didn't even offer her a glass of water. He said coldly, I'm not the Brian you know. Just pretend you've never seen me. Don't contact me again. He didn't even spare her a glance. Then he looked at me. He extended his hand toward me, as if saying, Lydia, you see? Nothing matters more than you. Come back. Stop making a fuss. But who is Tina? She's a rich heiress. Someone who has seen big scenes all her life. Hearing Brian's words, she didn't feel hurt, didn't cry, and didn't question him. She simply said calmly, Brian, I don't know what kind of shock made you say something like this to me, but we're engaged, we exchanged rings, received blessings from family and friends. If you call it off now, won't we become the laughingstock of all of South City? She casually rubbed the diamond ring on her right middle finger and said lightly, besides, your Waters and Trees software series launch is in a week. Are you really planning to miss it? I don't mind, but if my father gets angry, production will be affected, and getting investment in the future will be much harder. Waters and Trees was an idea Brian came up with right after graduating from high school. When he got to university, he told his professor about it, but the professor criticized it for being too ambitious, impractical, and lacking real-world application. Later, when he started his business, he used this idea in proposals to attract investors, only to be rejected again and again. The friends around him grew fewer and fewer. Only I stayed by his side. We squeezed into a tiny 10-square-meter apartment, so broke that we lived on instant noodles. He once said, Lydia, I only have 2 dreams in life. One is to bring Waters and Trees to the whole world. The other is to marry you. His tone was especially serious. I held his hand and said, then you've already achieved one of your dreams, because I'm willing to marry you. We both laughed so happily. Back then, even instant noodles tasted like a delicacy. Hearing Tina's words, Brian's gaze wavered. Lydia, he said, as if something was on the tip of his tongue. But in the end, he didn't say it. All right, Brian. Tina skipped forward and affectionately hooked her arm around his. Stop throwing a tantrum and come home with me. Dad is still waiting for us to have dinner. The hand Brian had extended toward me slowly withdrew. As he was leaving, he suddenly turned back and asked me, Lydia, do you still remember how the name Waters and Trees came about? He waited for a moment. When I didn't respond, he finally left. Bradley closed the door and sighed. That guy looks pretty young and naive, But I didn't expect him to be so decisive in how he handles things. Bradley had always spoken gently. I knew what he really meant. Today's Brian had revealed a kind of mature ambition. I nodded. He's always been like that. Maybe that kind of trait is something people are born with. Chapter 5. It was peak season at the company, and I started my miserable overtime routine, leaving early and returning late. Writing proposal after proposal every day. I thought I wouldn't have any more interaction with Brian. But unexpectedly, during the morning meeting, the team leader turned on the projector and started streaming a tech product launch. At the center of the screen, Brian was presenting his concept and theories. Step by step, he explained how to bring this idea to life and turn it into real revenue. 5 years ago, Brian lacked experience, but because he had been thinking about this concept for so long, he could present it with complete ease. Or rather, he had always been waiting for an opportunity like this. The team leader cleared his throat. We've received a major contract. We're going to do advertising for this newly developed waters and trees software. So everyone's going to need to put in some overtime. Try to submit a proposal within the next few days. The meeting room immediately filled with groans. Tony, a fresh graduate who had just joined the company, nudged my arm. Lydia, look at this Brian on the launch stage. He looks so young. But the way he talks and carries himself is completely different from us inexperienced folks. He's really impressive. I gave a perfunctory Back on the screen, Brian had returned to his role as CEO. The Sue family had probably assigned him a stylist, compared to when he had just arrived in this timeline and rushed to find me. He now looked far more polished in a suit. At this moment, Tina stood beside him. The two of them stood under the spotlight, accepting interviews from the media like a perfectly matched couple. For some reason, the topic shifted again to Brian and the Sue family's marriage. Congratulations on your engagement. When will the wedding be? Will the media be invited to cover the ceremony? Brian's expression remained serious and indifferent, clearly displeased at being asked about his private life. He refused to answer a single question. Only Tina smoothed things over beside him. Of course you'll all get wedding candies, but make sure the photographers capture my good side. Tony packed up his documents while continuing to comment. This President Brian is really ruthless. I heard that to marry into a wealthy family, he dumped the girlfriend who stayed with him through 8 years of hardship. Honestly, people can't succeed unless they're that ruthless. Someone patted his shoulder. You could do it too, go marry into a rich family. What are you talking about? Tony scratched his head. Look at President Brian's face, flawless. He could compete with celebrities. Maybe someone out there likes your type. Everyone started teasing Tony. It suddenly became an entertaining topic. Because of Brian's advertising campaign, our entire team began working overtime every single day. Bradley knew that whenever I got busy like this, I would skip meals no matter what anyone said. So he simply started preparing dinner and bringing it to my office. Fortunately, his teaching job didn't require him to be on campus every day. He only had 2 classes a week, and the rest of the time he just needed to focus on research. Before long, our entire team became familiar with him. Whenever they saw him, they would either call him professor or jokingly call him brother-in-law. Sometimes in the afternoon, Bradley would even order milk tea delivery for everyone nearby, treating the whole team to afternoon tea. Then came February 14th, Valentine's Day. Bradley showed up again, this time with desserts. The moment the team leader saw him, she immediately laughed. I know why Professor Bradley is here today. He must want to take his girlfriend out for Valentine's Day. After receiving so many treats from Bradley these past few days, the team members all started egging me on, insisting that I was not allowed to work overtime today and had to go celebrate Valentine's Day with him. Even the usually strict team leader stuffed cake into her mouth while pushing me toward the door. Happy Valentine's Day to you and Professor Bradley. As soon as we stepped out of the company, Bradley tightly held my hand. His cheeks were slightly flushed, and the corners of his eyes curved gently as he looked at me with warmth. Shall we go eat? He asked with a smile. A few days ago, I had already noticed him secretly busy with something, carefully making sure I wouldn't find out. So I pretended everything was normal. Sure. Chapter 6. But I didn't expect Bradley to bring me to such a high-end restaurant. The average cost per person was tens of thousands, and it operated on a membership-only basis. Standing at the entrance, I tugged at his hand and whispered, "Forget it. Let's go somewhere else. It's a holiday. Who knows how these capitalists are going to overcharge us? Bradley ruffled my hair. It's because it's a holiday that we should join the fun. Besides, what's this amount of money? Your boyfriend is at least an associate professor. Don't underestimate me. Bradley practically dragged me inside. He had even reserved a window-side table with a view, even though I had been working for years. This was my first time in such an upscale Western restaurant. I suddenly remembered that when I was with Brian, the most expensive meal we ever had was a pizza from Pizza Hut. Back then, we thought fast food like McDonald's was already the best thing in the world. We always painted rosy pictures of the future, if we ever made money. What we'd eat today, what we'd eat tomorrow, as if we were going to taste every delicious food in the world. Who would have thought that the first thing he did after making money was dump me? Halfway through the meal, Bradley suddenly gestured and called over a waiter. He leaned in and said something quietly. Not long after, a violinist from the restaurant walked over. He stopped not far away and began playing a soft classical solo. I opened my mouth slightly and whispered, "What are you doing?" He winked at me, then he reached into his pocket, took out a small box, and knelt down on one knee in front of me. "Lydia, will you marry me?" Everyone in the restaurant put down their utensils and turned to look at us. My face instantly flushed red. My heart was racing, pounding loudly in my ears. At that moment, I suddenly heard a voice that wasn't unfamiliar. "Brian, look, someone's proposing." Chapter 7. I instinctively looked up. What a coincidence. Tina was holding Brian's arm, standing just ahead to my right. They had just arrived and happened to witness Bradley proposing to me. Tina said, "How romantic." Brian let out a cold snort. He stared at me intently, like a stern, emotionless statue, yet his fingers trembled ever so slightly. Bradley also noticed the commotion behind him. He turned around and saw Brian. The two men locked eyes for a few seconds. When Bradley turned back, he still held the ring in front of me, stubbornly repeating, "Lydia, will you marry me?" At that moment, Brian made a strange gesture. He looked at me and shook his head, silently mouthing the words, Don't say yes." How ridiculous. From what position was he saying that? I extended my hand to Bradley, letting him put the ring on my finger. Then I answered firmly, "I do." Applause immediately erupted around us. The band switched to a cheerful celebratory tune. Bradley stood up and pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm so lucky, Lydia," he said, his lips brushing against my cheek. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Chapter 8. After the proposal ended, the restaurant owner sent over a bouquet of flowers and 2 desserts. I didn't really have much of an appetite anymore, but Bradley said the desserts here were a signature specialty and insisted I try them. At that moment, Tina and Brian, guided by a waiter, happened to be seated at the table right in front of us. Every time I looked up, I could see Brian looking in my direction. Occasionally, our eyes met. He didn't seem embarrassed at all. He would just slightly shift his gaze away, as if what had just happened were merely my imagination. Bradley noticed my discomfort. He patted my hand and asked, "Do you want to leave?" I was just about to nod, when a waiter suddenly walked over and placed a bottle of red wine on our table. Bradley frowned. "We didn't order this. It's from that table," the waiter said, pointing toward Brian's table. "Would you like me to open it now?" "No need." Bradley waved his hand. He knew about my history with Brian, so he was clearly displeased. "Take it back to them." "Oh, don't do that," Tina interrupted. She held onto Brian's arm, a wine glass in her other hand, and walked over. 1989 Chateau Margaux. "The taste is excellent." She took the corkscrew from the waiter, opened the bottle herself, and poured half a glass for each of us. On a day like this, you need good wine to go with it. Don't you agree, Brian? She smiled brightly, but Brian beside her didn't respond at all. His lips pressed together, expression cold. "It's already getting late. Lydia and I are heading back," Bradley said calmly. "It's not that late." Tina pouted slightly. "The last time I saw Miss Lydia with her boyfriend, I thought you two were just perfectly matched, a match made in heaven." "That's enough!" Brian suddenly cut her off. He frowned impatiently, his fingers clenched tightly, the knuckles turning pale. He looked up, forcing a faint, somewhat lonely smile. Lydia. He called my name, raising his glass toward me. Happy Valentine's Day. With that, he tilted his head back, drained the wine in one go, and abruptly turned to leave, leaving Tina alone. She lowered her head, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she muttered softly. Like a child, so troublesome. She toyed with the wine glass in her hand. A few minutes later, she returned to her previous warm demeanor and started chatting with me. Lydia, I heard your company took on Brian's project for advertising? I nodded. No wonder he's been paying so much attention to the ad campaign lately. It's not even within his usual responsibilities, Tina said, crossing her arms thoughtfully. We're hosting a celebration banquet in a few days. Maybe we'll run into each other again. I treated her words as nothing more than casual small talk. After a week at work, the team leader came to find me. Lydia, there's a business dinner in the next few days. The general manager wants to bring along a technical consultant who understands the project. You should come along. I've never liked attending events like that, so I refused outright. But the team leader kept persuading me. The general manager specifically asked for you by name. It's just a small dinner, 1 or 2 hours at most. Please don't make this difficult for me. The general manager was a man nearing 50. I had only seen him speak on stage a few times during company-wide meetings. I didn't want to put my team leader in a difficult position. Seeing his conflicted expression, I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. All right. Chapter 9. I originally thought the general manager and I would go separately and meet at the venue, so I got his number in advance and sent him a message asking for the location. Unexpectedly, he called me directly. Lydia, wait for me downstairs. I'll drive, we'll go together. After more than an hour on the road, the car stopped in front of a luxurious villa. From a distance, I could already see the villa brightly lit, like a lavish castle. I suddenly recalled what my team leader had said, it'll only take 1 or 2 hours. Just a simple dinner. This didn't look simple at all. The general manager extended his arm toward me. I don't have a female companion today. Lydia, would you do me the honor of being my partner for the evening? He winked at me, and oddly enough, there was a kind of fatherly warmth to it. I smiled and hooked my arm through his. By the time we entered, there were already quite a few people in the banquet hall. At the very center was a small circle, the core of the gathering. The general manager pointed toward it and lowered his voice. You should know them, right? Brian and Tina, the union of a rising tech star and an established capital family. Everyone in South City is talking about it. I replied. I've heard. I'll take you over to say hello. Perhaps he thought I was nervous. He subconsciously reached out with his right hand and patted the hand I had hooked around his arm. It felt almost like a father walking his daughter down the aisle, more like an elder than a superior. Brian and Tina stood at the center of the crowd, dressed in formal evening wear. They handled the steady stream of guests with ease, until someone suddenly said, "Aw, Mr. M.O., you've brought such a beautiful companion tonight." The general manager quickly replied, Lydia is one of our company's most capable employees, excellent at her work. I brought her here to meet more people. Brian slowly turned in my direction. When others spoke to him, he no longer responded. He let go of Tina's hand and walked straight toward me. Only then did Tina notice the movement on our side. Lydia. She immediately put on her signature smile and greeted me. We haven't seen each other for a few days. You've become even more beautiful. By the way, how are things going with Professor Bradley? Since he's already proposed, the next step should be meeting the parents and preparing for the engagement and wedding, right? The general manager looked surprised when he heard that. Lydia, you're getting married? Congratulations. When the time comes, the company will prepare a big cake for you. I touched my nose, feeling a bit of a headache. It's not set in stone yet. We just got engaged a few days ago. We're not in a rush. We'll take it step by step. Just like that, the topic shifted to marriage. The general manager, who seemed like a practical, family-oriented man, went on and on about it with me. By the time I looked up again, Brian was no longer where he had been. Chapter 10. Because I was never comfortable in this kind of setting. Staying too long made me uneasy, so I used feeling unwell as an excuse and went to the lounge. I sat on the sofa, took out my phone, and tried to come up with a reason to tell the general manager I wanted to leave early. Halfway through typing, the lounge door opened. Brian stood at the doorway, holding the handle. His face looked pale, and he didn't seem to be in good condition. "Lydia," he said, "how have you been?" From my side, since I had already accepted Bradley's proposal, there was no longer any connection between Brian and me. I ignored him, put away my phone, and prepared to walk past him and leave. But as I passed by, Brian suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Can we talk properly? Just once?" "There's nothing for us to talk about." I forcefully shook his hand off and moved to leave, but Brian stepped ahead of me, shut the door, and locked it. He pushed me onto the single chair by the door, then crouched slightly, holding my hand. "Lydia," his voice sounded somewhat pained. "What? You won't even talk to me anymore?" He pressed his lips together, as if recalling something. "Do you remember back in college, when you skipped class to go with me to meet an angel investor? That night, on the way back, we stopped by a convenience store to buy dinner. There was a lucky draw, and we won a pair of toy rings. You said that counted as our token of love, that we would definitely get married someday." There was a hint of pleading in his gaze. "Lydia, do you still have that ring?" I looked at him coldly. "President Brian, you're worth hundreds of millions now. How could you possibly care about a cheap street stall ring that wasn't even worth $5? But, he lowered his head, murmuring, "I regret it, Lydia." His voice was very soft, so soft it almost felt like I had imagined it. "You have nothing to regret. Everything right now is good," I said, shaking my head, but Brian stared at me intently. "Lydia, can you give me another 5 years? I'll use 5 years to accomplish all my business goals, then completely cut ties with the Sue family. After that, I'll marry you. I'll give you the grandest wedding in the world." Smack! I slapped Brian across the face. I frowned as I looked at him, the face of 20-year-old Brian, the body of 20-year-old Brian. Why had everything changed so quickly? I had been with him as he grew, as he struggled, as he chased his dreams and his future. But maybe I had never truly understood him at all. Even if he were given countless chances to choose again, to start over, he would still abandon me without hesitation and seize the opportunity for success and power. 5 years, 10 years, what difference would it make? Perhaps that version of Brian, the one from our youth, was nothing more than my own wishful thinking all along. Chapter 11. He let go of my hand and didn't stop me again. As I left the lounge and walked down the stairs, my phone suddenly rang, an unfamiliar landline number. "Hello, are you a family member of Mr. Bradley? This is the emergency department of Central Hospital. Bradley has been in a car accident. It may be life-threatening and requires surgery. Could you come over as soon as possible? We need someone to sign the consent forms." My phone almost slipped out of my hand. A car accident? How could that be? Just yesterday, we were together, having dinner, making plans to watch a newly released movie this weekend. I ran down the stairs like I'd lost my mind, tripped, got back up, and rushed outside. I hadn't driven today, and it was hard to get a taxi in this area. In panic, I called the general manager, but couldn't get through. Of course, he was probably still entertaining guests. With no time to deal with me, my eyes filled with tears, a black car suddenly stopped in front of me. Brian rolled down the window and said, "Lydia, get in. I'll take you there." At that moment, I had no energy left to think about anything between me and Brian. I quickly opened the passenger door and got in. On the way, my hands kept trembling uncontrollably. Images of a bloody accident scene kept replaying in my mind. I was terrified. I couldn't hold it in anymore and started crying in the car. He quietly pushed a box of tissues toward me. His hand hesitated for a moment, then withdrew. "It'll be okay. Nothing will happen." That was the only sentence we spoke during the entire drive. When we arrived at the hospital, Bradley had already been taken into the operating room. I sat on a bench outside, my emotions gradually calming down compared to before. I had already made up my mind. Even if something really happened to Bradley physically, I wouldn't abandon him. We would face it together. Even so, I was still anxious. My fingers unconsciously tightened around the zipper of my bag, and the metal edge cut my skin. Blood immediately welled up. Brian quickly walked over and crouched down, He took out tissues and wrapped my finger. It was just a small cut, but he handled it carefully, even wanting to call a doctor over to take a look. It was too much. For the first time, I found Brian noisy. Back then, when he treated me well like this, I would have been deeply moved. I stared at him blankly as he busied himself. Suddenly, the operating room light went off. The doctor walked out. I rushed over, grabbing his sleeve anxiously. My mouth was dry. I couldn't even speak. The doctor removed his mask. Looking exhausted, he looked at me. That moment felt as long as an entire year. Finally, he said, "The surgery was successful. The patient has been transferred to a regular ward. After about 2 to 3 months of rest, he should recover." My body went limp, as if all my strength had drained away. I collapsed onto the ground. Tears fell like beads. Brian stood at a distance, leaning against the wall. After a long while, he slowly asked, "Lydia, if I were the one in a car accident, would you be this worried?" He took 2 steps forward. His hand hovered above my shoulder. But in the end, he didn't place it down. He said softly, "Lydia, is there really no possibility left for us?" I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. "Brian, if you still cherish what we once had, then don't disturb me again." He nodded. He looked at me one last time, as if he understood something. He said nothing more, turned around, and left. I only learned later. That was his goodbye to me. That was the last time I ever saw Brian. He still looked the way he did at 20, the time when we loved each other the most. But unfortunately, love could never withstand the long river of time or the tide of desire. And just like that, he faded out of my life, like so many ordinary passers-by who had once brushed past me. Chapter 12. After Bradley recovered, we got married that autumn. It was a small but warm wedding party. There weren't many people, just relatives and close friends from both sides. Everyone took a group photo together, and it still hangs on the wall of our bedroom. The following year, I got pregnant. I gave birth to a baby girl. Her skin was very fair. She was well behaved, and she looked more like Bradley. Occasionally, I would still hear news about Brian, mostly from television or newspapers. His career became more and more successful, his business empire expanding across the world. When it came to his competitors, he never seemed to show mercy, even toward the A-city conglomerate that had once helped him. He struck ruthlessly in business competition. The conflict between him and the Sue family was brought out into the open. Paparazzi captured photos of Tina holding hands with another young man. They confidently claimed that this couple was only keeping up appearances, that if it weren't for the massive financial implications of divorce, even their superficial marriage wouldn't have lasted. The very next day, other tabloids published photos of Brian hosting an all-night party at his private villa. By the pool, there was loud music and dancing, with many influencers and streamers dressed in revealing swimsuits. In one secretly taken photo, someone even scrutinized closely and noticed that the wedding ring on Brian's left hand was gone. All of it seemed to confirm that Brian and Tina's marriage was on the brink of collapse, nothing more than a transaction of wealth. Meanwhile, my life with Bradley was as simple as that of the most ordinary people. He published 2 excellent academic papers, gaining more recognition at the university and gradually making a name for himself in academic circles. I was also promoted to team leader at my company. The only disturbance came when our daughter, Cammie, got lost for an afternoon when she was 4 years old. At that time, both Bradley and I were very busy with work, so we temporarily asked Bradley's mother to come over and take care of Cammie for a few days. Feeling bored at home, the elderly woman took Cammie to the mall. It had just opened, and the crowds were overwhelming. Her hearing wasn't very good, and somehow, she and the child got separated in the flow of people. Cammie called out to her, but she didn't hear. She called us in tears. Bradley and I immediately reported it to the police. By evening, the police brought Cammie back. They said she had been found by a kind stranger. We had been worried the entire day. Once we realized it was a false alarm, we quickly asked the police if they could tell us the person's name. Even if he didn't want any money, we at least wanted to thank him in person. The officer shook his head. He insisted on staying anonymous. With that, he left. Bradley and I looked at Cammie. She seemed completely unfazed, holding a bag of snacks in one hand and a doll in the other. Bradley frowned at her. Where did those come from? The uncle I met bought them for me, Cammy said in her soft, childlike voice, looking very serious. Bradley stomped his foot in frustration. Didn't we tell you not to accept things from strangers? But the uncle wasn't a bad person. Cammy looked completely justified. She reached into her pocket, took out a small box, and handed it to me. Mommy, the uncle asked me to give this to you. To me? Curious. I took it and opened it. Inside was a toy ring. It was very old, never particularly refined to begin with, and now, worn by time. It even had cracks forming on its surface. Bradley leaned over to look. What is it? Nothing, I said quietly, putting the ring away. I crouched down and gently patted Cammy's head. Did that uncle say anything? Cammy thought for a moment. He seemed to be talking to himself. 5 years have already passed. You're living so well. If I ask you to come back, you probably wouldn't agree, right? Anyway, just weird stuff like that. I pulled Cammy into a tight embrace. At that moment, I felt grateful to Brian, grateful that he had brought my daughter back. A few days later, I was cooking in the kitchen while the news played on the television. My daughter was in the living room playing with building blocks. Suddenly, she ran over and called out to me. Mom, come look! The uncle who found me is on TV. I froze for a moment, wiped my hands, and went over with her. The television was indeed showing news about Brian, but it wasn't good news. Renowned tech CEO Brian has died in a sudden accident. His car veered off a cliff. According to sources close to him, Brian had a habit of street racing, and the accident is very likely related to that. My daughter tugged at my sleeve, her voice soft as she looked up at me. Mom, that uncle died. Are you sad? A tear slid down from the corner of my eye. He was someone I had once known so well. Of course I was sad. Brian, in this life, you already fulfilled your dream of rising to the top. In your next life, I hope you can live a little more freely. Chapter Extra Tina. After Lydia sent Brian back, I could tell something was off about him. He hadn't been particularly enthusiastic about our marriage before, but he had never opposed it this strongly. My friends advised me, break up with him. Brian may be a high potential catch, but with your status as the only daughter of the A City Group, what kind of man can't you get? But I didn't listen. I couldn't help it. Back then, I was like a moth drawn to a flame, completely consumed by Brian. Love. Looking back now, it's almost laughable. Later, under pressure and temptation from my father and other powerful figures, Brian and I got married. At least on that day, I was happy. But the sweetness of the marriage didn't last even a week. Very soon, he used being busy with work as an excuse and moved into a private apartment near the company. I said I wanted to go with him. He refused. Soon after, he applied to take charge of a North American project and left for 2 years. From then on, we lived completely separate lives. After the project ended, Brian returned to the country. His methods became even more ruthless. Waters and Trees was expanded worldwide under his leadership, and new product lines were constantly developed. He used every possible means to suppress competitors. People used to call him Young President Brian. Now, who would dare offend him? At business dinners, even elderly executives in their 60s, who had managed companies for most of their lives, would stand up to toast him when he appeared. Even my father grew increasingly wary of him. He often said, "Don't think that just because you two are married everything is fine. That man has no real feelings. Sooner or later, he'll turn against us." My father wasn't wrong. Later, our company ended up competing directly with Brian's. We thought that, at the very least, given our marriage and the support we once gave him, he wouldn't treat us like enemies, even if he didn't hand the project over to us. But reality proved we were wrong. Brian showed no regard for any past ties. He struck hard, so hard it seemed like he wanted to crush a city entirely before swallowing it whole. The outside world watched with amusement. A son-in-law like that in the A City Group? What a spectacle. During those days, I kept questioning myself. Why? After all the effort I put into securing this marriage, was this really how it would end? I went to his company to find him, but his assistant stopped me. After several attempts, the assistant seemed to pity me and said, "Ms. Sue, President Brian no longer lives at his previous residence. As far as I know, he's moved to No. 7, Nangang Road. Maybe you can try there. No. 7, Nangang Road. An old district, crowded buildings. 7 or 8 stories high. Over a decade old. Poor sanitation. Poor property management. Poor greenery. Brian living in a place like that? I could hardly believe it. But to my shock, he really was there. A tiny apartment of barely a dozen square meters. Only when Brian opened the door did I finally believe it. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. Through the open door, I could see the room was sparsely furnished, a desk with a laptop. When he saw me, a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes, as if he had been waiting for someone, and realized I wasn't the person he was hoping for. The wedding ring on his left hand was gone. In its place was a strange, cheap plastic toy ring. I asked him, "Brian, do you really have to be this ruthless?" He looked impatient. It was only a matter of time before I broke with the Sue family. If not now, then in the future. Aside from a marriage certificate, what else do we even have? His expression was cold. His right hand unconsciously rubbed the ring on his left hand. I suspected that had become a habitual motion. "Brian, are you still waiting for Lydia to come back?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Brian said nothing. After a long moment, he suddenly slammed the door shut. Just like that. He shut me out. How guilty. I let out a cold laugh. That cheap ring must have something to do with Lydia. So many years had passed, Lydia was already married with a child, and yet he still couldn't let her go. In truth, Brian's one-sided love for Lydia was the same as my one-sided love for him. I was pitiful. He was pitiful too, but from the moment he closed that door, I suddenly felt an unprecedented exhaustion. I didn't want to continue like this anymore. I had been stubborn. I had tried. I had even used every means possible to tie Brian to my side. I thought my efforts would earn me at least a moment of his attachment. But no, if he didn't love me, then he didn't love me. Why couldn't I just wake up? I, Tina, an heiress, was not going to hang myself on one tree. I gathered all my strength and kicked the heavy iron gate of No. 7, Nangang Road. Then I flipped it off and cursed loudly. "Go to hell, Brian. I'm done with you." After yelling that out, I felt completely refreshed. I turned around and called one of my girlfriends. "Find me a few male models tonight, tall ones. At least 1'8" or 1'9" meters. I'm going out to have some fun. Brian, goodbye." Chapter Extra Brian. Chapter 1. I traveled 5 years into the future. It was a strange experience. I was an orphan. I had no parents. Lydia was my only family. I took a taxi and rushed straight to No. 7, Nangang Road. Along the way, I kept wondering, what had happened between Lydia and me now? Were we married? I thought that 5 years later, I must be living a happy life with Lydia. Maybe not rich, but as long as the two of us were together, life would surely be joyful. I wouldn't interfere with the life of the Brian from 5 years later. I just wanted to take one look. That would be enough. But I didn't expect things to be this complicated. The apartment at No. 7, Nangang Road was tightly shut. I waited downstairs for an entire day, but never saw the lights come on. I went to the property management office. Unexpectedly, when they saw me, they said, "Sir, you're finally back. We haven't seen you for a long time." It turned out that Brian had already bought the apartment that Lydia and I once lived in. I made up an excuse that I had lost my key and got a spare from the property office. Then I opened the door. The room was quiet, clean, and tidy. There weren't many things inside. Everything looked exactly the same as when I left, 5 years ago. As if nothing had happened in those 5 years. I changed into slippers and walked in. There was a letter on the table. The recipient was Lydia, and the sender was Brian. That immediately piqued my curiosity. There were only a few simple lines inside. "Lydia, you probably hate me. I abandoned you in front of the whole world, a liar who gave up 8 years of love for his ambitions. Even I despise myself like this. I feel dirty. If I told you that I now feel pain, regret, sadness, that life feels meaningless, would that make you feel any better? If life could start over, how wonderful that would be. Brian." I held the letter and sat by the window in a daze for a long time. For some reason, I could feel the sorrow in those words. This was probably the last letter from Brian 5 years later. I didn't know how things between him and Lydia had ended up like this. We loved each other so much. We clearly promised to get married. At that moment, something small fell out of the envelope. It was a ring, the one Lydia and I had won from a convenience store lottery. Holding it, I made up my mind. I was going to find Lydia as she is now. Chapter 2. I didn't tell Lydia that I had found Brian's letter from 5 years later. I decided to hide it, pretend I knew nothing. I believed that after everything we had been through together, after all the hardships we had endured, we could start over. But I never expected that 5 years later, I had a fiancé, and she had a boyfriend. The moment I saw Bradley, I could hardly believe it. How was that possible? I almost broke down. I wanted to grab Lydia and demand, had she forgotten what she once said to me? Brian, I will marry you. She called Tina over. Perfect. I could break up with Tina in front of everyone, then pursue Lydia again. But she said something I never expected. Don't you want the investment for the Waters and Trees project anymore? I admit, from that moment on, I began to waver. I had been chasing this dream since high school. Money, fame, power, status. So much of it suddenly seemed within reach. It was as if life had opened up a fast track for me. But at the time, I didn't realize. Every shortcut comes with a price. Chapter 3. Waters and Trees. In the beginning, I wanted to promote this software so the whole world would know it was developed by me. So people would know about Lydia and me. So people would know that, just like the software I created, trees cannot exist without water, just as I could not be without her. And as long as this software existed, our names would remain tied together. How romantic. But gradually, when I realized this software had the potential to make money, my original intention changed. Compared to the love I once wanted to express for Lydia, my focus shifted more toward the success and profit it could bring. The hand I had once reached out to Lydia slowly withdrew. Later, I regretted that decision every moment of my life. But fate never gives you the chance to start over. I returned to the villa with Tina, the wealthy district, luxurious beyond measure. We had separate rooms, both on the second floor. Sometimes, at night, she would come to see me. To be fair, she was very beautiful, but all I felt was annoyance. I would always coldly tell her to leave. She never got angry. Instead, she would just smile and say, "Brian, you're really like a saint, completely unmoved even when temptation is right in your arms. Do we have to get married before you're willing to cross that line?" During the day, I went to the company to handle business. At night, when I was alone, I couldn't help but think of Lydia. I would think about her living with Bradley. What were they doing at this very moment? Had they already crossed that line long ago? The more I thought about it, the more my head felt like it was splitting apart. An indescribable sense of panic engulfed me. Gradually, I began to rely on sleeping pills just to fall asleep. I also learned how to smoke. Often, I would sit there with a cigarette between my fingers, enduring the entire night alone. On the screen in front of me were the rising red numbers of the stock market. In the business world, everything was going well. Every second, every minute, millions were flowing in. I suddenly spoke into the empty space beside me. "Lydia, look, we won't have to struggle anymore in the future." The moment I said that, I froze. Lydia wasn't by my side. There was only me. Chapter 4. 5 years later, Brian left many things for me in the drawer. Not only stacks of contract documents, but also several boxes of psychiatric medications. They couldn't be bought domestically and required a doctor's prescription. At first, I found it strange. How did he manage to get these things? But a few months later, when I gradually took over the company, I realized that not all of the company's money was clean. I once tried to launder all of the company's funds, but I found it far too difficult. Moreover, having certain underground connections did make things more convenient. A man named Pat handled these matters for me. He even helped me track Lydia, telling me how she was doing now. So I became like a voyeur hiding in a dark corner, only able to silently watch her life. Her work kept getting better. She traveled with Bradley. She forgot to eat dinner. She picked up a stray cat. She argued with her colleagues. Her days were still as full as before. It was just that her joys and sorrows no longer had anything to do with me. I thought I could hold on a little longer, wait until I fully promoted the Waters and Trees project worldwide, and then break completely with the Sue family. But on Valentine's Day, Lydia accepted Bradley's proposal. For the first time, I felt that my life had slipped out of my control. I smashed everything in the room. I didn't leave the house for days. Tina stood at the door without coming in, speaking in a tone that sounded just as lonely as mine. Brian, why bother? She's not coming back. That man named Pat also noticed my depression. I never knew what exactly his relationship was with the Brian from 5 years later, but it seemed that he would do anything Brian asked. On the day of the celebration banquet, he sent me a message. President Brian, the man named Bradley who is with Miss Lydia, I've arranged a car accident for him. He's badly injured. If you want him dead, I have people at the hospital as well. I stared at that message. My first reaction was actually, if Bradley died, would Lydia come back to me? Do it. After sending Lydia to the hospital, I typed those words to Pat. I was just 1 second away from pressing send, but I hesitated. Ever since Lydia learned about Bradley's car accident, her condition had been terrible. After being with her for so long, it was the first time I had seen such a fragile side of her. Her tears kept falling. Her hands trembled. She anxiously grabbed at the emergency doctor's sleeve. But none of this was for me. It was for another man. I carefully walked up to her and asked a meaningless question. Lydia, if I were in a car accident, would you care about me this much? The moment the words left my mouth, I already knew the answer. I had been completely abandoned by Lydia. In her future life, there would no longer be a boy named Brian. I deleted the message telling Pat to deal with Bradley. If I could no longer stay by her side, then I hoped that for the rest of her life, there would be someone else who would love her wholeheartedly. Lydia, you must be happy. You must be blessed. You must live better than I ever could.